reminiscing on what has happened in the past, but if you will allow me just a little bit this morning, I want to remember just a little bit of what happened to me years ago. I know I've shared a lot about my growing up here in the church, but I can remember banisters being in here, choir loft here, there's a banister here, there's a little walkway right here on the other side. I can remember Austin Cootie making those banisters, and I remember in Bible school, we little boys would get out there and we sanded those banisters down so that they could be finished and all. But what I'm getting at, I can remember when I was just a teenager, we were in revival. Back then, we had revivals. When we had revival, it was always the second week in July. But we had revival in the morning and in the afternoon. I remember it was on a Monday morning. Chester Taylor was the pastor here. I forget the man that was preaching. But I can remember the church being full on that Monday morning. I was on the back row in the choir loft. And I can't remember the passage the pastor preached on. But I remember when the invitation was given, I couldn't stay there. I got up and I came, I knelt right here. And this is where I gave my life to Christ. Folks, this is my place. Have you got a place that you can remember that you gave your heart to Christ? I mean, I'm serious. If you're saved, most likely you can remember the moment and you can remember the place. And this is my place right here. I knelt on my knees right here with tears running down my face and gave my heart to Jesus. Haven't always lived up to it. I've made mistakes. The Bible says all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. But I have that place that I can remember. I haven't done it in a long time. I used to know right what to keep to the church for. If I was over in this neck of the woods, I would take and stop here at the church. I'd come in. And that's where I wanted to get. I'd sit right there. And me and the good Lord would have a good talk. Now my place is in my prayer room at home. I got a recliner in my study. And I get on my knees in front of that recliner, put my head in the recliner, and that's where I have fellowship with the Lord. And I want you all to have a place of fellowship. And again, David said early in the morning is the best time to pray. I agree with it. Early in the morning, you're fresh. Before things begin to happen, you can just relax and let God speak to you. And you know, prayer is not always asking for things. The majority of our prayer should be listening to God. If we'll be quiet long enough and begin to listen, He'll begin to speak to you. And when He begins to speak, you'll realize it, and you'll have a much better day because of it. I don't see any need in going up there, but I just want to, just a simple message this morning, taken from the 8th chapter of the book of Matthew. Just 3 short verses. If you look back about 3 chapters there, you will find that Jesus went up into the mountain and sat down, and His disciples came to Him, and He began to teach them. And for chapters 5, 6, and 7 is what we refer to as the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus spoke a lot on the Sermon on the Mount. He had a lot to say about the coming kingdom and what we would experience here on this earth. But when Jesus got through preaching the Sermon on the Mount, the Bible says in chapter 8, verse 1, and when He came down from the mountain, great followed him. People were always following Jesus. Some of them were following him because they wanted a closer walk with him, and some followed him because they realized that he was the Messiah, and they wanted to learn more about him, and they wanted to be as close as they could. But most of them followed him because of the miracles that he performed. Now, miracles never saved anyone. One miracle, people would see it and they'd want a larger miracle next time. But the multitudes followed Jesus coming down that mountain, and then something else happened. The next two verses says, "And behold, there was a leper. And he worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou can make me clean. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will. Be thou clean. And immediately the leprosy was cleansed. A miracle of all miracles. Have you ever studied and realized what leprosy was? It was the most dreaded disease in the world at that particular time. If a person had leprosy, they were quarantined. They were not allowed to be among people whatsoever. Leprosy was a disease that sometimes it would start with just a little sore on the arm or on the face. And that sore would get a little worse, and finally it would just burst open and a terrible stink. Other times it would start off, your fingers would get numb. You couldn't hold anything very well. Finally, your hand would get numb. If you try to pick up something, it would fall out of your hand. And from there, it would get worse and worse. Leprosy was something that was dreaded by anyone and everyone, but not only the disease itself, but being separated from people, being separated from the family, I believe was worse than anything else. You think back just a few years, and when COVID came, and a person that got COVID, they were isolated. And many people died during that isolation period because, most likely because they didn't have anything to live for. They wouldn't allow anybody to come in to see them and to be with them. To remove you from your loved ones is one of the worst things that could happen to anyone. Now, this particular story, not only is it told in Matthew, but also in Mark and in Luke. But they don't go far enough for me. Just think for just a moment. All we know about this man is that he had leprosy, and that he came to Jesus, and that Jesus healed him. Folks, let's think about him just a moment. We can't come up with a name for him. Let's imagine just a few moments of what it might have been like. Think about him as maybe being a farmer. And we live in a farming community. And during harvest season, he was out gathering his crop, and he began to notice that one day his fingers, he couldn't feel anything. But he kept working day after day, and finally by the end of harvest season, grabbing a hold to the implements to harvest his wheat, he would feel like maybe somebody else's hand is holding that instrument because he couldn't feel anything. He would come home at night, and he would just hold it up to him like holding a bird or something. He hadn't told his wife, but he knew that she noticed something. But one day he came in, he went to a basin of water, and face, and he dipped his hands down in that basin of water, and all of a sudden it turned blood red. He looked down, and his fingers had been cut. He didn't know when. He didn't know why. His wife looked at him and very softly said, "You've got it on your clothes also." You can imagine this man standing there, realizing what had happened to him, and thinking about his wife. And most likely he might have had a child or two. He knew in his heart that he had contacted the dreaded disease of leprosy. His wife also knew. And she looked up at him and said, "Should I go to the priest with you?" You see, they didn't have doctors then. They would go to the priest for this. And he said, "No, I'll go by myself." And he wrapped his hand in an old rag, and he went to the priest. The priest looked at him. He looked at his hand and looked at his face and looked at his body. His priest held his hand like this. "You're unclean, unclean." And from that point on, he had lost everything that he had. He lost his family. He lost his farm. He lost his neighbors. He lost everything. None of his friends. And as he left the priest, he was banded to go out from among anyone and everyone. And as he went out, his wife met him with a little basket full of clothes, a little bit of bread, and a few coins. The last time anybody touched him. Horrible life. People see him coming, and he had to holler, "Unclean, unclean, unclean." It was against the law for him to get any closer than 6 foot to someone. And if the wind was blowing from him towards someone, he had to stay at least 150 foot away from them. A horrible life. And no one wanted to be close to him. Fast forward some 5 years, 6 years, the disease has completely invaded his body. In fact, the book of Luke says that he was full of leprosy, meaning that every inch of his body was covered with sores. Most likely, some of the fingers had fallen off, and probably other parts. In fact, you could think of his face full of sores, and maybe an ear had fallen off or a nose had fallen off. It was an awful situation. And as he would try to go somewhere, no one would let him get close to him. He said one day, just trying to remember what used to be, he decided that he would go back to the community that he was raised in. And as he went back there, he wanted to maybe look on his farm and look back to the house that he had and maybe just get a glimpse of his wife's face. He didn't see his wife, but he saw some children playing out in the yard. And he hid behind a tree and watched them. They were having a lot of fun, laughing, playing. He got so caught up with what the children were doing that he stepped out from behind the tree. And when they saw him, they began to scream and scattered and run everywhere except one little girl. He said, that could have been my little daughter. I hadn't seen her in 5 or 6 years. She was only 3 years old when this all happened to me. And the last thing I remember doing is touching her cheek with my finger. I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to her. But that little girl stood there and looked towards me. He said, that made me want to get better. That made me want to find someone or something to help me. And I'd heard about this man named Jesus, but I had never seen him. I just heard about And on this particular day, as I was walking around trying to stay out of everybody's way, I overheard someone say that this man named Jesus was preaching up on a mountain. And I made my way up close. I dared not get close where people could see me, so I hid in the bushes behind some rocks there, and I listened to this man as he preached. When I was listening to him, my heart changed. He said, see, I went there in anger. At night, I would lay awake and I would ball my fist up at heaven and ask, why did you let something like this happen to me? And that day as I went and I wanted to see Jesus, and I was going to demand that that man either take my life or heal me. But when I heard him preach, and when I saw his face, all I could see was love. When I saw his face, I knew that this man hated this disease that I had as bad as I did, or even worse than I did. And I listened to him preach there, and when he was through preaching and he was coming down that mountain, he was coming back down close to me. The crowds were around him, and I knew that if the crowd saw me, that they would pick up stones and start throwing at me. But at that moment, it didn't matter. All I wanted to do was be close to Jesus. And as Jesus came slowly by and the crowd's following him, and he came slowly by, I stepped out from behind those rocks and those bushes towards Jesus, and the crowd began to scatter. They began to holler, unclean, unclean. But Jesus was different. He turned and he saw me. And instead of running the other way, Jesus came towards me. And I fell down at his feet and worshiped him. And the book of Mark said that he got on his knees. The book of Luke says that he fell on his face before the Lord Jesus Christ. But anyway, that book of Matthew says that he worshiped him and then spoke. Said, Jesus, if you will, you can cleanse me. He didn't demand it, but he had confidence in his heart that Jesus Christ could heal him of that disease. And Jesus reached out and said, I will, but went even further. This man a human being hadn't touched him in all of this time. Do you know how important a touch is? Riding down the road, I like to reach over and just touch Peggy. I said, honey, I'd just like to touch you. When I get up in the morning and we make the bed together, we meet at the foot of the bed, I just want to hold her. If I see her during the day, I just want to put my hand on her shoulder. I just want to just touch her. It's the same way with my children. I just want to touch them. And if you know me, you know that I'm a hugger. I hug people. It's my way of saying, I love you. I care for you. I want the best for you. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus reached out and touched this man. Can you imagine the touch that this man received? Can you imagine what went through this man's mind when Jesus went out and touched him? My question this morning, have you been touched by Jesus? When I was a teenager, he touched me right here. I've never been the same. If you've been touched by Jesus, you'll never be the same. If you've been touched by Jesus, you're going to remember the place that he touched you, and you're going to remember what he did for you. Jesus not only healed the man, and he was healed instantly I can remember Jesus on his way to the city of Nan, and he met a funeral procession, and he looked around and he saw a poor widow woman, and this was her only son that they were taking out to bury him. And he walked up and touched that widow woman. And then he went over and touched the casket. And the funeral procession stopped. And he raised that man from the dead and returned him to his mother. Oh, what a touch it was. You can remember Jesus in the city of Jerusalem at one particular time, and he met a man that was blind from birth. And how Jesus spat in the clay and mixed the clay, anointed it, and anointed his eyes with clay and told him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The touch of Jesus. The clay didn't heal this man of his blindness. Jesus did. You see, the children wanted, mothers wanted to bring their children to Jesus. And the disciples said, he's too busy. He don't have time for you. But Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me. And again, he said, unless we humble ourselves as a little child, there's no way that we can enter into the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus took those little children in his arms. He loved them. He prayed for them, and he blessed them. Jesus was always touching someone. Look into John chapter 6, and we find one of the great miracles of Jesus feeding the multitudes. Jesus didn't touch the multitude, but he touched the food. 5 little coin dodgers and 2 little sardines. Matthew said he fed 5,000 men plus the women and children. See what the touch of Jesus does? This man was touched by the one who created everything. Back up to John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things that were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made, letting us know that God used Jesus to create the earth that we live on. God used Jesus to create the sun that we get warmth and light from. God used Jesus to create the moon that we get the night light from. And the moon has so many different other things that happens because of it. Look up into the sky on a dark night and see all of those stars, and every one of them Jesus made and placed in a specific place. And not only that, but Jesus reached down. He's the one that made you. He formed you in your mother's womb. And he placed you where you are today. And he placed you there for a reason. And that reason is so that we can tell the world about him. Just think about the touch of Jesus this morning. Has he touched you? Can you really remember the moment that Jesus Christ reached down and touched you, and you gave your heart and soul to him? I know a lot of people can remember the day they joined the church. In fact, I can. You see, in this very church, years before I got saved, 9 or 10 years of age, the pastor's son was my best friend, and we stayed together as much as we could. But again, it was in revival, and there had been no movement in the revival, and the pastor, my friend's daddy, was the pastor. And he told his son that he was old enough to join the church. But my friend came to me and said, Alvin, Daddy wants me to join the church, but I don't want to do it by myself. Will you join with me? And being the good friend I was, that Friday night, when the invitation was given, we walked this aisle. We took his daddy by the hand. We joined the church, lost as a ball in high weeds. And the world is full of good old church members that have joined the church and know nothing has ever happened to them spiritually. Others, I've had people come to me, Alvin, I want to be baptized. Folks, baptism doesn't save you either. You can be baptized so many times that you know every tadpole in the river on a first name basis and still die and go to hell. Church membership and baptism is wonderful, but it should come salvation first. You need to know that you're saved. When you accept Jesus Christ as Lord of your life, then you need to ask for baptism, the Christian baptism. And after the baptism service, become a part of a faith-believing church. That's the way it goes. But so many times we get off and we think joining the church is going to save us. Baptism is going to save us, folks. The only thing that's going to save you is the shed blood of Jesus Christ. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father except through me. Believe in him. Again, as we close this morning, can you remember the moment that Jesus saved you? Can you remember the place that you were saved? If not, today would be a good day to get things right. Come to this altar and ask Jesus to save you, because he's the only one that can. Father, I love you. I thank you, Lord, for this day that you've given us. I thank you for this church and the memories that I have in this church. This is the place that you saved my soul. It was in this church that you called me to preach the gospel according to Jesus Christ. It was in this church that I was ordained to preach the gospel according to Jesus Christ. And it was this church that sent me out as their missionary to other places that I might be able to spread the gospel of Jesus. So this place means a lot to me. But I know that Jesus is here this morning. The Bible says that our body becomes a temple of the Holy Spirit. And Jesus said that he would never leave us, nor would he forsake us. And when we came into these doors this morning, we brought Jesus with us. This is just a house where we meet to worship. But if you are a born-again Christian, you brought Jesus with you. If you're not a born-again Christian, then you can be before you leave this place this morning. Father, thank you. And we thank you for all that you're doing. We pray in the sweet name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting us. It's always a blessing. We are dismissed.